Hello, BookTube. I'm coming to you with a Zoom chat today with David from the YouTube channel, Live Forever or Die Trying. Hello, welcome.
How you doing?
Your channel is zeroing in on 1,500 subscribers. That's kind of exciting. And I thought that would be a good, that's a good occasion to talk about your explosion onto the scene. Not last July, but the July before that. You made a video or two, and then you made a video that rocketed off. You care to tell everybody about that? I'm not sure everybody will know.
Yeah, so the whole thing was kind of unintended. I've always been kind of like into like self-development and whatnot. And I know you pick on a lot of the bro tubers, but I think I came from a place that was similar to that originally.
We'll be getting
a lot of like these self-improvement people talk about, reading often. And reading is something I've always hated. And I think, school might have something to do with that. But I ended up picking up a few books that were just strictly to my interest and ended up liking it. So I figured, I'd jump on this challenge, try to read a book a week, see what it was all about, saw other people making YouTube videos about it, and ended up kind of getting bit with it. I think in one of my follow-up videos to the very first one where I announced that I was going to be reading a book a week, I did like a 6-month check-in and I said, I'm surprised I've made it this far. I didn't expect to be making this video. And for some reason, I don't know if it was just the thumbnail with a bunch of books, people looking for recommendations or whatnot, but it kind of took off, but I'm thankful for it.
Yes, because you went from a healthy viewership per video to that one video that spiked.
Yeah, I think it's at like 20,000 now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And in the meantime, how has the reading gone? You went from not reading at all, not liking it, to trying it in the BroTube kind of way. But did it stick? Obviously it stuck, right?
So yeah, I've got a big investment into reading now. And I definitely see like differences in my day-to-day life. I think I originally did it trying to make it like a long-term consistent habit, put in 10, 20 minutes a day, make it a daily habit. That went out the window immediately. Some weeks I read 2 or 3 books. Some weeks I didn't read at all. And it just kind of like went in phases and like moods. But as long as I let that happen, I found myself keep coming back to it. Like I was actually hooked and it's something that was pleasurable. So even once I dropped off like the daily habit aspect of it, I kept like finding myself reeled back in or in search of more information. Because as we know, I mainly read nonfiction. So a lot of it's topic-based and kind of mood-based with what I want to learn at a given time.
But that is where you differ from those BroTube channels, because they never admit that. They never admit that the thing they wrote in their thumbnail is not something they do anymore or ever really did do. I tried living like Ben Kenobi for a week, and here's what happened. When they're on other social media showing you pictures of the fact that they never even tried it, that it's all just a clickbaity lie. At least you're trying. But you told me the other day that you have an even deeper on-camera origin story. Even deeper than BookTube.
Yeah. So
I wonder how many people listening will connect with this, but you gotta hear those of you who are watching, you gotta hear this.
it'll be interesting. I think it's sort of unique, which I like. But so I've always been like a terrible learner, terrible student. Elementary school is when I peaked. Middle school started going downhill, started becoming a little disinterested. And then by the time I got to high school, it was bad. I was into like video gaming, and it wasn't anything of value why I was doing bad in school. It was just disinterest or what have you. I was always like getting by. I didn't have to study. I could pass tests and whatnot, but I didn't do homework. I didn't take it seriously at all and squandered, a big opportunity. But coming into high school, I started playing video games and ended up actually getting kind of good. So coming out of middle school into freshman year of high school, I was playing League of Legends a lot. And I ended up getting to the point where I was in the top 5,000 out of quite a few million people and ended up trying to go pro with that. So it's always funny retelling it because it actually was like pretty close to happening. I ended up becoming the largest freelance coach on the largest freelance website at the time. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was lolcoaching.com if anybody wants to see if you can dredge up the old cache of that. But I ended up putting in quite a few hundred of hours coaching to the
What does
point.
that mean? Coaching.
So coaching in
People
like
listening, they're saying, who needs a coach to play video games?
exactly, right? So this is kind of like when esports were starting to actually go big. They're starting to get, hundreds of thousands of people watching these professional games and whatnot through Twitch or what have you. And people who were good at the game but wanted to see if they could take it up to the next level, get a contract from either a cell phone company or a professional gaming team that would pay them to play. But there's also a more casual aspect. If all of your friends are in a higher tier above you and they don't want to play video games with you because you're not quite there, maybe you would just go out of your way to get a little coaching and try to get better. So you have a whole gambit of players, from people that want to just kind of get a little bit better to people who actively want to go pro. And I started off teaching people a little bit on the more casual side. And then as my kind of portfolio or hours put in grew and grew, I got up to the point where we were coaching people on borderline pro play. And once we got up to that level, you kind of know everything there is to know about the game. You kind of have your reaction down, like, every aspect of the game.
Right.
So you're trying to eke out.
We're going to think that's the sum and essence of it.
Mm-hmm.
What can you coach once you know the game? What is there to coach?
That's when we started trying to eke out even smaller advantages. So I ended up getting into a lot of self-development because of that, looking into meditation to control emotional tilt, so you are less reactive to the game if something doesn't go your way, so you can make up a deficit instead of getting angry and spiraling. Also started looking into like very basic smart drugs. So like there's a bunch of studies that showed caffeine and L-theanine, when combined, increased reaction speed, but you still didn't lose your edge because of the jitteriness of caffeine. And even started looking to like paracetams and these other smart drugs and stimulants. So that was a very interesting area to be in. And of course, we never pushed this on people, but having the knowledge and the research together to know, if you wanted to do this, this is what a player could do to eke out another small advantage. So that kind of put me into the research headspace. And when I came out of high school and I was actually looking at taking a career in esports, I have a family business that my dad runs, and he kind of sat me down and said, hey, you can go to San Francisco, you can go to London, or you can go to Texas to investigate if you want to do this. And he's like, but this is going to be what you're walking away from. And it kind of like hit me like a moment of realization. Like, I can go, possibly chase a multi-million-dollar esport gaming team, which might work, might have a 1% chance of success. Or I could move to Europe, and my unpaid position, if my team doesn't make it into the championship series, I could get cut after 4 months and then sent back home. And the other jobs that were available were in a very fledgling industry, so like esports journalism and play testing for the actual company, Riot Games and whatnot. So the opportunities were very like high risk, high reward, and I kind of came crashing back down to earth. I'm like, hey, this is a thing I could do, but it's not realistic. I have something safe at home. It's a job I'm passionate about, and I really don't mind it. It's just I've had this passion for playing video games. So once I kind of made that decision, I quit gaming entirely because I couldn't half-ass it or play it for fun.
You want to be in that window all the time if you weren't going to go through that door, right? Okay.
Exactly. And then so I full stop, cut gaming off. But that kind of residual self-improvement and I guess optimization always stuck with me thereafter.
So, of course, given that your channel name is Live Forever or Die Trying, I want to talk about that optimization. But first, I'm not asking you to look through that window anymore, but you can tell little tales of it, especially if you take the names off it, right? Some of these e-players, I'm sure that a lot of my listeners don't know the money that's involved here. Some of these e-players, these esport players, are in their early 20s and they're multimillionaires.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot riding on this. And Am I right in saying that even now it's an industry where the players are not tested in any way? It's certainly in any way similar to, like, for instance, professional bodybuilding.
Currently, it is the Wild West, but we see that changing. I think in some fighting games, they're starting to test players for doping.
Okay, but
And
when you
the
were doing it,
doping
there was no
aspect,
testing, right? When you were first involved, there
yeah,
was nothing like that.
nothing at all. Yeah.
Did you hear stories, or maybe directly, about players who were willing to do anything? You talked about
Oh, yeah.
relatively benign combinations of relatively benign drugs.
Mhm.
There's a lot more you could do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was not uncommon. Like, so it wasn't like super common. Like, not, half of players were doing this, but like 1 in 10 players, it wouldn't be surprising to hear they were using like modafinil, which is like a class 4 drug in the US, and it's an anti-narcoleptic. It's a stimulant, but it has like a similar effect to Adderall without the jitteriness. And it also has this weird effect that in a lot of people, it rounds off your emotions. So it helps on that aspect of not getting tilted in a bad situation, and also makes your reaction speed faster. So that was like one of the most common, or I guess most far out there drugs that people were using.
Yeah, because imagine, you mentioned, you're taken on by some team as a coach, things go bad for them and they cut you. Imagine how much worse the 5th player on that team must feel, how much more they must worry about being cut and be willing to do anything to have that not happen. I think that's fascinating. I wonder what that situation is like today,
Yeah, it
as it
seems to
creeps
be.
closer and closer towards the real big time.
Yeah, I think
Right?
people are still looking for even more edges to find. And I haven't been in the scene for a while, but from like the little headlines I have been seeing, it looks like they're kind of realizing, this is a thing a lot of people are doing. And do we want this like in the spotlight if it ever comes to that?
Right.
So
Do we
they're
want
like
instead
kind
that
of
we did nothing
preemptively,
about it when we
yeah.
knew? Because that's what the players all say, right? They all say their life is just grinding. That's the word. They
Oh, yeah.
grind. And you'll hear them routinely talk about 20 hours of continuous gameplay. Even I, knowing nothing about the industry, would listen to those videos or listen to them talk and say, well, okay, you can't do that for more than 2 days, maybe, without a lot of chemical help, even as a 20-year-old. I wonder how that'll break down. Surely you'll be watching, even if you're not participating.
Oh, yeah. And it's like such a weird career. It's kind of like almost like my girlfriend's a dancer, and I kind of like equate it to that in a way that like you only really have a 5-year prime in a lot of this, like 18 to 23, especially if you look at the Asian countries. It's like if you hit a certain age, a lot of contracts like won't even look at you because they realize they can't keep you on for a certain amount of years past that because your edge is gone. And it's just like you're using your brain and clicking a mouse, but yes, it like matters that much.
Well, I want to talk. You mentioned that you were in that world because of personal, biological, mental optimization, and you kept that interest when you created a booktube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear about that, even though, let's be honest here, we have just lost a large number, almost the whole, of a certain demographic of people watching this video, because
Yeah.
you said, I was almost pro in video games, but I left it. And then you said, as an aside that you don't intend to dwell on, my girlfriend is a dancer. And now we're changing the subject. So there's a huge demographic.
Reel it back in.
Right. They're saying, no. I don't want to hear about the rest of this. He used to work in video games. His girlfriend's a dancer. Can we concentrate on that? But nevertheless, despite that spurned demographic, I want to move on to the subject of personal optimization, because that's the whole sum and essence of your channel, right? Live forever or die trying.
Oh, yeah.
And it occurred to me when I was thinking about that I am 1/2 of a whole century older than you. And what you are trying to do here, reading all about, is to avoid that. You're trying to avoid what has happened to me. And I wonder why that is. I mean, why is that?
So
Those of you who are watching who don't know, his channel concentrates not only on nonfiction, but largely on a certain kind of nonfiction. the kind of, you know, anti-aging life hack kind of thing that has a lot of garbage in it. We're going to get to that as well. But you try hard to sort of pick your way through the garbage and get to the real stuff. And why is that? What is there a deeper motivation there, or is it just a carryover from your origin story?
Besides the fear of death, which is largely something I think a lot of people carry, and then I don't think anybody wants to die, but that I don't think I'm like driven by fear in that aspect. I really do think I kind of just love life. So I did the esports thing, and I've kind of got close to a lot of these dream scenarios. I'm very privileged in that aspect. But I also love the outdoors. I love scuba diving. I've jumped out of airplanes. I just love chasing, you know, adrenaline and kind of everything life has to offer. And at least at the moment, I dread when that comes to an end. And I figure it's a good return on investment. You know, if I spend, you know, time learning about how to upkeep what I am, and I'm living a happy life right now, I would like to continue that for as long as possible. And, you know, knowing about the optimization space put me in kind of like similar circles to people who also kind of follow this. And I think there's another demographic, which I will go ahead and mention to like set myself apart from. You have these kind of Silicon Valley types that also chase this and run in the same circles. And they're very much optimizing for cash or optimizing for, I guess, human capital. They almost like commodify themselves in that aspect. But I just like kind of like want to say that I really do love being alive, and I love everything that this world has to offer, and just exploring our history, exploring our philosophy, you know, what it means to be alive. I just think there's something really special about that. And I don't think I have the time right now to figure out everything I want to figure out. So that kind of led me to this. And in a very realistic sense, I think it's been a pipe dream for humans since age old. And now I think we're actually cresting the horizon into when it's possible.
I think a few people who are listening who heard you say, well, nobody actually wants to die, are probably having my reaction of saying, well, I thought that before the 2020 presidential election. And now I every morning log on to the news and think, nah, I'm okay.
It'd be so bad.
Would it really be worse than this? But that's fascinating what you say, that your reading has led you to the impression that this has been a, you know, a Ponce de Leon fountain of youth pipe dream forever, but your reading has led you to think that it's not so much of a complete pipe dream anymore, that exactly. The technology is starting to catch up with this desire. So what form would that take? Cellular regeneration? The prevention of cellular degeneration? The human body seems designed, so to speak, for a certain number of refreshes before it just starts to break down that ability to do that.
Yeah. So I guess there's a few things I'd like to touch on in answering that question. So I think the first thing is like kind of an evolution-based thing, and then the methods of how we think we're aging, and then kind of just an overall idea of how to approach it in general. So the overall idea is, I think there's definitely a religious aspect that needs to be addressed separately about like the soul and spirit and if they're intertwined or not. Personally, I think that it might be built in if you want to even have that conversation. But I feel like the human body is kind of like a more complicated car. You can keep a 100-year-old car running if you do the upkeep on the individual parts. And if we do the upkeep on our hearts or our livers, our genetics, I don't think there is a good reason to say that we can't upkeep this machine. Again, spirit out of that, right. You know, that's a whole nother topic. Right. The second thing is, from an evolutionary standpoint, I think the reason we age personally is because genetics doesn't need to optimize for it. Genetics needs to optimize. Well, it's a blind process. It doesn't need to optimize, you know, just survival of the fittest weeds out what doesn't work. But it only needs to get to a point where the genetics get passed down. And we see this in a lot of different genetic mutations. You'll have a genetic mutation that can make somebody a super athlete. And then that might, back in the day, translate to you're an amazing hunter. But if your cartilage wears out that much faster because you've optimized for this, which makes you a better hunter, which means you can have more offspring because you're a higher social status, after that aspect is done, you know, the body doesn't need to optimize for maximum lifespan thereafter. So I think nature doesn't need animals to live past a certain length. So that's something that would need to be solved. Now, when we actually talk about how would we realistically approach, like in a laboratory, fixing aging, I think you need to figure out what aging is. So aging right now is just a grab bag of different stuff. I think it means, by the most popular definition, just some form of degeneration from the optimal stage. And there's a few theories of why that happens. So David Sinclair has his information theory of aging, which is basically the DNA is like a Laserdisc CD, and the epigenome is what reads that. And through accumulation, your regular DNA is there, but the epigenome that reads it starts having errors and starts accumulating mutations and leads to undesirable circumstances. So if you could fix that, that's a very base level way to prevent aging. And they're looking at like doing stem cells to do this. And I think I always love bringing up the example that when two 30-year-old people have a baby, the baby doesn't come out as 30 years old. It doesn't, even though it's created from two 30-year-old cells, it comes out as a newborn. So we already know there is some way for at least a sample of cells to reset themselves. And theoretically, if we could regenerate or engineer that to happen, you know, sporadically, we don't know the consequences of this, but that first step seems possible. And there's a host of other downline theories. You know, if you can fix the heart or you can fix the liver, that's a whole different range, you know, cure cancer. But I think a lot of the scientists that are working on ending aging specifically are looking at very baseline. How does the damage occur in the very first instance? And then if you fix that, then you don't have to worry about the symptoms. You know, if you fix the genetic mutation, you don't have to worry about cancer. If you fix the genetic mutation, you don't have to worry about heart disease or neurodegeneration. If you attack that very core essence of the problem, theoretically, you wouldn't have to address the rest.
Do you think that there's a child in the world today who will live to 150?
I'm not a scientist, so I will repeat what other scientists have been saying and other futurists. You have people like Sinclair that already believe they're going to live past 120 and 150. He's a geneticist at Harvard. You have some people like Aubrey de Grey that think they're going to live to 1,000. And part of that is marketing, because they're trying to push an idea. They're trying to, you know, he's a geneticist at Harvard who has 12 biotech companies. There might be financial incentive to say this. So I try to look almost at the more political figures in this space. And one of the books I read recently, The Abolition of Aging by David Wood, he kind of grabs all the information in the field and tries to say, you know, given all of this, in an optimal scenario with funding, how far out are we to making these first breakthrough discoveries? And the figure he gives, which I think is optimistic, is in an ideal circumstance, there's a 50% chance that we can do it in 20 years. So that's super fast. But the other thing to consider is there's this concept called longevity escape velocity. And basically is we don't have to do it all at once. To kind of explain that, you have your maximum lifespan right now in the US is around 77, I think 78. But if you can cure heart disease, for example, then in that time span that it took you to figure that out, call it a year for simplicity's sake, that you have added an average of a half a year to your total population's estimated age. And if you can keep racking up these accumulations fast enough, then you will hit a point that the average life expectancy is increasing by more than a year for every year you live. And that's called longevity escape velocity. Basically, your average lifespan for your population is increasing faster than people are aging. And at that point, you know, you're full throttle. You would still be mortal, obviously, and get hit by a bus and die, but the actual repair of the body would theoretically you'd have an increased timeline to figure out the rest of that.
But interventionist, right? As you pointed out, natural selection creates a biological organism with a lifespan. You're saying this would be interventionist, much like many health improvements have been in the last 2 centuries. It'd be a thing that humans would do.
Yeah, I mean, a vaccine isn't natural, but we've got rid of measles because of it, or not for some people's lack of trying.
Yes, we won't talk about the spiritual. We'll try not to talk about the political. This is the dance that you play every time you make a video.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, okay, just for instance, a very prominent geneticist at Harvard who may have a financial incentive to goose his narrative. And there are plenty of other incentives as well that don't have to be financial, although I think they boil down to fleecing an audience. And that brings up another question that I have about the reading that you do, the reading that you present on your channel, which is, I alluded to it already, which is that you have to field your way through not just a lot of woo-woo, a lot of, ridiculous pseudoscience, but also a lot of just plain snake oil salesmen, people who know that they're providing bad information and are doing it anyway. That is not a critical dance, let's just say, that most of zillennials even bother to do. It's not a critical dance that even most of them even know how to do. You have to do it all the time. So what percentage would you say of the stuff that's out there is worth paying attention to?
I mean, if we're talking about, I'll kind of drill down. So if you're talking about the market as a whole, stuff that is marketed for anti-aging or making you look younger, if you go to Walmart, you'll see thousands of products in the supplement section that have similar claims.
Life augmentation, just in general, it's $1 billion industry.
Oh yeah, I mean, and a lot of it probably has some amount of merit. Like, for example, if you look at traditional Chinese medicine and there's this one herb that does this one thing in this one scenario, that might be a valid treatment for a thing, but it's been repurposed and rebranded and mixed with a bunch of crap to sell product. So to actually find the good information that needs to be actioned in the right way to be personally beneficial, I'd probably say the market is exceedingly small. I don't even know if I could begin to put a number on it. Even it narrowing down the field to somewhat serious biohackers or people that claim to be in the space, you'll see people like Dave Asprey, which is a huge name, at least in this space, and he's one of those bro science guys, who's talking about like radiation, like from 5G towers, and he's talking about, grounding. He has his bed hooked up to an electric cable that's connected to the ground outside so that his ions in his body regulate. And there might be something there. I haven't looked into it, but it seems like woo-woo. And I feel like if it wasn't woo-woo, we'd be seeing way more of it from real doctors, right? But you have to weed that out from the stuff that is genuine science. Like, the other thing I used to think was really woo-woo was red light therapy. So you're telling me I'm going to shine a certain color of light on me and it's going to do a thing. Yeah, sure. But you have Johns Hopkins that's run like multiple hundred of studies, and turns out, red and infrared light at a certain wavelength stimulates the ATP process in your mitochondria, and sports teams are investing millions of dollars in it now. I thought that was bullshit last year. So it is a constant learning process.
When I first became acquainted with your channel, I went on YouTube on a little safari and watched a lot of these guys with their presentations. And I would estimate that your percentage of how many of them are worth paying attention to is about right. Might even be a little bit generous. I was watching these guys give presentations in unwashed t-shirts, obviously speeding on methamphetamine right there in front of the crowd, and saying, yeah, I'm the greatest human who's ever lived. I walk into a room and married 90-year-old women try to give me their phone numbers. I can't even help it. I don't like it. It's just a byproduct of being so biologically perfect. And this is your attendance fee. And here's all my merch links. And none of it is, it's obvious that none of it is true.
Yeah.
Then you say, what you say is right. There'll be something that will come along that you dismissed. that turns out to be valid. So just we could go on like this forever because this is absolutely fascinating. But to wrap up, where do you see the? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you yourself use the term futurist, and I think whether it might be a hoity-toity term, I think you are one, just by virtue of where your interests fall.
Probably.
Where do you see the next, let's say, you mentioned 20 years. What if we can finish with a little bit of amateur prognostication, assuming for the minute that we have a habitable world in 20 years, and assuming that we're all still here to see it, or at least you are. If you just did an imaginative jump right now to 20 years from now, what would be common in conversation on this subject that is unknown right now?
Obviously, a lot of where we're heading has to play into that. But assuming ideal conditions, we fix a lot of the problems we have now.
Yes.
There's a lot of problems that need to be solved even once we get this technology. Because I think this is all very, like bringing it back to living forever and anti-aging. A lot of the science is very legitimate that we're trying to solve. You know, I think there's a lot of legitimate scientists that actually think that we can identify the cause of aging and then hopefully vaccinate it. That's a misuse of the term, but fix the problem or prevent it.
And they don't degenerate when you're 30. They start degenerating. If they start, they can be made to stop. That is not woo-woo at all.
If we can do that, I see a lot of good that can come out of it. But I think there needs to be a big public consciousness about the downsides as well. So obviously, if this technology is limited to a few small hands, elite organizations that can afford it, it's going to cause problems. But if we can get to a post-scarcity world where we can use our technology to benefit everyone, you know, if you get to a post-scarcity environment where it doesn't make sense to hoard wealth, then hopefully we can live in a more altruistic society. And I would love to see just everybody, like you start getting back, I think, to like enlightenment philosophy. You know, what is the purpose of life? You know, what makes life worth living? What do we chase? Like our timeline has been expanded. We don't have to worry about working for a certain amount of years to retire in a certain amount of time. So we have 10 years to hit the golf course or what have you. I think that we can, as individual humans, probably become better at, I haven't figured this out yet, as you can tell, but I would like to imagine a future that the increased timeline that we have would lead to better innovations, a higher quality of life, tech that is focused on improving lives instead of improving profits. And just overall, chasing dreams of humanity, whatever that might be, whether it's space colonization or whether it is bringing back extinct species. You know, once we're giving a unending time frame, just chasing those moonshot dreams. I would love to see a future that that's possible and that people can do whatever they want to do because you've removed limitation off of them.
And the dystopian nightmare version of that would be where the people like Elon Musk do live to 200, but nobody else does.
Elon's an interesting character. That's a whole different subject. I think he's a lot of good and bad in the same person. Touching on it super briefly, I just read a book where they're talking about post-scarcity economics, and his company, SpaceX, he has a quote, and I haven't looked into the rest of where this quote comes from, but he talks about why SpaceX isn't publicly traded. And he said, because they're trying to mine this company, or mine this asteroid. And this asteroid, theoretically, if fully mined, could lead to that post-scarcity environment. And his quote is something along the lines of, I don't want my company publicly traded because I don't want investors making decisions on what's good for the average person. So he almost wants to be solely in charge, at least this is the quote, so that once he amasses this amount of wealth, he can distribute as he sees fit, equally. So that's a whole nother conversation. But
well, then we're going to have to do this again. That's all there is.
Sounds good to me.
But in the meantime, I will leave a link to your channel down below so everybody can go and see it. And you don't hold to a strict upload schedule, right? Whenever you're,
It's kind of, the entire thing's experimental at this point.
yeah,
I try to do monthly at a bare minimum. I've been posting a little more recently, exploring the new TikToks of YouTube. I filmed a 60-second video the other day. I think that's going to be terrible, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, just YouTube, kind of shotgun approach right now. Do a bunch when I can, and sometimes.
A job in the middle of a pandemic, I think that's good enough. Well, thank you very much for joining me. And we'll wrap this up for now, but we'll talk again.
Talk soon.